It's always been one step forward, multiple steps back for Avowed. I've talked about it many times, but you go back to the initial gameplay reveal, there's so much excitement. This could be Obsidian's next Skyrim, and then they finally reveal gameplay, everyone's let down, people start to forget about the game. Finally, Obsidian, they make a comeback, there's a bit more gameplay, things look a bit improved, people are liking it again, and then Obsidian put their foot in it once more, and they start putting out articles basically saying, no, this RPG feature is definitely not in it. Oh, Baldur's Gate 3 let you do this, you definitely can't do that in Avowed. Really just de-hyping their own game, and it's always puzzled me because I genuinely can't think of another situation like this, where a video game company is trying to de-escalate the excitement. Like, their customers are pumped, they're ready to pre-order Avowed, it's looking great in their eyes, and then the company themselves are like, hold on a second, calm down, like, it's gonna be okay. It's not gonna be that good though, just expectations in check. And I mean, some people might be thinking positively about this. They might be thinking, Obsidian, they're doing what we've always wanted from a video game studio. They're being open, they're being honest. I kind of think about it maybe a bit more realistically, just seeing the video game industry all these years, which is that Obsidian maybe just don't have confidence in the product. And that's why they're not seemingly excited themselves, and they're making the general public less excited. Now, Obsidian putting their foot in it, there's been another example of this over the last couple of days. So we've just had Gamescom, Xbox were there showing off all their brilliant stuff. They were trying to hype up their games, and yet the only thing anyone remembers is that Indiana Jones is going to the PS5. So that kind of tells you the state of Xbox at the moment. But Avowed was there, and we finally got gameplay previews. So rather than just seeing some trailers here and there, they allowed the players, people, to actually play the games. And they weren't real people playing them, mind you. They were video game journalists who were getting access, but at least someone was playing them. And we're hearing from the different outlets, the IGNs and so on, who are telling us how this looks, how it plays. Now, based on the previews, the gameplay footage that's gone out, there are a number of people who are genuinely excited. They think it looks good, even if that's not everyone. There are still plenty of people who are mixed on it. They don't think it all looks that great. But you'd think, given there is some positivity, probably more than there's been in a while, Obsidian would have just left it. They'd let this gameplay footage get out there, they'd step back for a bit and just sort of let that sink in. No, they managed to put their foot in it again. They did an interview where they were asked, is the game going to be at 60 FPS, at least on console? And they didn't even just give an answer and leave it there, 60 FPS, 30 FPS. Instead, they said something to the effect of, oh, it's going to be 30 FPS, it's a single-player game, you don't need 60 FPS. 30 FPS is fine. Came across as patronizing, like they know more about having fun with games than the actual paying customers. Was just stupid. They didn't need to say that. Maybe it was just one guy who made a mistake, but it just kind of tells you maybe the culture of that studio, how they feel about players. We'll talk about the FPS stuff in a little bit, but I just want to come back to these previews. There's a lot of these Avowed previews, these gaming journalist outlets who've been playing it. I've seen about 15. Most of them are very positive. I found at least one that wasn't. That was very mixed on the game. But I also found that these positive ones were a little bit confusing. And I wanted to think about this properly because I've said some negative things about Avowed, and the very short of it is, I don't think Avowed is definitely going to be bad, a really bad RPG or anything. It's more, what I've seen doesn't give me confidence. It comes across as being more of a combat romp, dungeon crawly sort of game, with some quests scattered throughout. Obsidian have said, players have sort of tried to tell me, no, it's going to be like the Outer Worlds, but just a fantasy edition. But I haven't seen that in the marketing. If it was like the Outer Worlds, I would expect to be seeing a lot of towns or settlements with shacks, heaps of NPCs around to talk to. But they've never shown that. They always show lots of combat, and then maybe there's one NPC wandering around in the middle of all of that combat, and that's it. So I'm expecting a game where you do lots of combat, you occasionally meet an NPC who gives you a quest, rinse and repeat. I'm not expecting that real balance like the Outer Worlds and Knights of the Old Republic, those sort of hub-based games that this was supposedly based off. I'm not expecting it to be like that. Lots of town settlements, NPCs, and some dungeons and combats. I think it's going to be 90% dungeons, combat, and a little bit of writing and quests. And that to me is a problem, because I've always expected Obsidian's strength is the writing, the story, the choices that you make. And I feel like there's going to be less of that. I could be totally wrong, but I'm basing it off what they have actually shown me. And this is part of why these previews confuse me, and they just feel a little bit dishonest, like there's maybe a little bit of an agenda here. And keep this in mind as well, because Microsoft Xbox, Obsidian is an Xbox studio now, they haven't always gotten the best treatment from the reviewers. Like Nintendo, Sony, any game they release, even if it's mediocre, it often gets a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Maybe it's bad for me to say that now, because Concord, the live service from Sony, just came out, and that was getting terrible reviews. Embarrassing game, it looks like. That aside, you know that happens a lot, where the Nintendo Sonys get really, really good reviews. Even Call of Duty, like they release a 4-hour campaign Call of Duty with the same old copy and pasted multiplayer, and that'll still get really, really good reviews. Meanwhile, some no-name studio releases a solid, but maybe not excellent indie game, and that'll get like a 4 out of 10. Why does that happen? Because these reviewers are corrupt, and it's not as simple as like a good old-fashioned bribe where the publisher just hands them money and that's it. It's more the case of they know if they keep giving, say, high-profile games bad reviews, then they won't get any advertising money. Because the whole sham of this industry is the Gamespots, the IGNs. Their job is to review games, but then who's paying them? Well, it's the same companies whose games they're reviewing. They're paying advertising dollars, so you get your banners. If you try and use IGN on your phone, you don't have ad blocker. It's a total joke. You can't see anything because of all the ridiculous adverts. And so basically, if they start getting bad reviews, they'll lose these perks. Less advertising money, less handouts, getting games early, all of that sort of stuff. And I just feel like now that Microsoft are basically the biggest third-party publisher, they own Call of Duty, so much else, maybe these outlets are feeling like they need to be a bit more generous, a bit nicer. That's one theory. The second theory for why they're being overly positive is most of these people, they don't play games. They especially don't play like CRPGs or role-playing games with any sort of depth. And when they play something that maybe puzzles or confuses them, they just give a positive review because they're kind of scared of looking incompetent, like they don't know what they're doing. And again, these so-called journalists, they want to be writing political articles. It's a distraction for them to have to write about these video games. Get that out the way, get back to writing about sexism or racism in the industry. And it might not be all of them, but it is plenty of them who do that. And for instance, IGN's preview here. Avowed, we finally played Obsidian's first RPG and it's fantastic. The world of Aora is looking awesome. Okay, as soon as I read that, I just kind of tuned out. Like, the chances of this preview having genuine integrity just totally dropped when I read that. And the person who wrote it, Destin, he's made some YouTube videos. I think sometimes he's given some solid opinions, but he's also very often an Xbox Microsoft shill. And I've seen this a lot with Avowed, where as soon as Obsidian became a Microsoft studio, all these people came out of the woodwork who've never cared about Obsidian before. Suddenly they're really interested because now it's on their turf. They're part of the family. We want them to succeed because then the Xbox brand looks better. And I mean, that's not going to happen. The Xbox brand seems to just be plummeting. So whatever, but that's sort of what I mean by an agenda. Maybe some of that because it's Microsoft. Now, this isn't really one of the bad ones. I just wanted to point that out. This is one of the confusing ones. Xbox exclusive Avowed is like Skyrim, plus one of the last decade's best sci-fi movies. Now, they say it's like Skyrim, but Obsidian themselves have made a special point of saying that it isn't like Skyrim. Like, they were very adamant, and remember, they pitched it originally as being their Skyrim, but then they changed it and made it more hub-based. And I like hub-based, but just seemed like they were lacking some direction. But to see the preview say this, I don't believe that it's like Skyrim, because if Obsidian could get away with comparing this game to the Elder Scrolls, I think they would do that because it's just such a sure thing to get sales. People want another Skyrim. They themselves were worried about those expectations because they knew the game wasn't going to be like it. So this preview is saying it. doesn't seem honest. The person either doesn't play that many games or they're trying to overhype it more than the actual company, Obsidian themselves. And you just read a little bit, it's like, I blasted the creature with one of my dual flintlock pistols. This one charged with electricity. It sent arcs down through the water, shocking a few skeletons that were joining the fray. As they looked to overwhelm me, I unloaded with both my pistols, zipped a little sideways with a dodge, and clambered away to unload on them before they could slice me up. It's like trying to do all this interesting writing just to describe a generic combat encounter, basically. And I've seen this in a lot of these previews. Maybe they do this for everything, and I just fortunately don't read a lot of this crap. But if you watch the gameplay footage, there's nothing that special going on. It's just a generic quest where you do make a handful of choices, and I'll give Obsidian some credit. Like, it's nice that there are some choices in there. My whole argument is I just don't think there'll be that many. There's going to be less than prior Obsidian games. And that's mainly why I talk about this. I don't think Avowed's going to be the worst game ever, even like another Starfield where it drastically disappoints everyone. I just think it's going to be a step down, despite some of these people trying to hype it up maybe to be more than it's actually going to be. Saying it's going to be like Skyrim, that just doesn't seem true. Playing Avowed feels like an Obsidian RPG with Skyrim-like combat, dialogue options that reflect your build, and newbie-friendly fantasy lore. Now, is most of this meant to be positive or what? Because Skyrim-like combat, I don't think Skyrim's the best RPG ever, but I can recognize its strengths and why it's popular. I think that's important, even if you think Skyrim's a bit dumbed down compared to other games. I think the positives there are in things like exploration, making your own fun. A lot of people love that. Certainly not in the combat. Like, Skyrim, like combat just tells me it's kind of dumbed down, pretty actiony, not that interesting. I even think that might undersell the Avowed combat, because I really think that's Obsidian's focus here, is to try and do better combat. I just think that's sadly come at the expense of what they normally do well, the writing, the quests, the story, which I think will be a little bit lacking, and that is what's going to disappoint people. So saying Skyrim-like combat, like, the person's either ignorant or they thought they were hyping the game up by saying this, which I don't think they are. Newbie-friendly fantasy lore, I mean, again, they're probably trying to be positive by saying you don't have to know about the Pillars of Eternity universe to get into this, but I think a lot of people just see this and think the developer's just going to treat me like an idiot who can't understand things, so they have to make it all really obvious, certainly not like Elder Scrolls, Dark Souls, which I don't think are the best story games or anything, but they at least treat the player with some intelligence as you're exploring the world. Avowed is the Elder Scrolls formula in a Pillars of Eternity world. Again, Obsidian said that is not the case, so I don't believe you. Just seems like there's dishonesty going on, or again, ignorance, where people don't actually understand what the Elder Scrolls formula is. They just see first-person combat. Oh, it's the Elder Scrolls, yeah! I don't believe you, and I'm quoting the developer themselves when I say that. Avowed, hands-on, Obsidian didn't forget how to make a great RPG. Now, this again is them trying to be positive, but like that sounds like they have nothing positive to say, but they had to think of something that didn't sound really negative. So that's the best thing that they could do. Obsidian didn't forget how to make great RPG. Really nice headline. Avowed plays like a funny Obsidian role player where you buddy up with the voice of Mass Effect's Garrus. Now, I've seen this a lot where it's like there's nothing really positive we can say about Avowed, like nothing really special about the game itself. So instead, the most positive thing we can come up with is, hey, one of the voice actors was in a game you liked from 15 years ago, the Mass Effect trilogy. Look, Garrus is back, but it's not actually Garrus, it's a new character. It's just the same voice, and that probably only applies if you're English speaking. I'm sure it's not Garrus in all of the translations, it's probably different voice actors. But, I mean, who cares about this? Like, the video game industry voice actors, there's probably not that many. Like that Troy Baker guy or Nolan North. They do like every second video game. No one really cares. No one's buying a game for them. And they're probably more skilled, more prominent voice actors than the Garrus guy. It's nice and all, but no one's buying a game for this. If it's the best thing you can say, again, a bit puzzling. It just makes me think people want to be positive about this for the sake of it or something. But then we get to this one, which is a very mediocre, I guess, review of the Avowed preview. Interestingly, this is one of the few previews where the outlet's not mainstream. So it seems to be someone more independent. And I'll be as honest as I can here, like Janet Garcia, who's doing the review, like pronouns in the Twitter bio, if she was someone who wrote a glowing review of something like this, I wouldn't just take her seriously immediately. So I don't just want to sit here and say this is definitely factual just because it's maybe backing up my bias or something. Like, it could be nonsense, but keep in mind this is independent, unlike the IGNs and so on. So it could be more trustworthy. And this person does say, Avowed feels ordinary. I played Avowed, and I was underwhelmed by my session. The combat didn't feel good, the abilities weren't interesting, and the level design leaned into an arena-like structure that limited your fighting options. I saw a bit of that in the preview as well. It made me wonder if they're taking, like, the new Doom games as an influence, where you have an arena, kill all the enemies, then move on, and there's occasionally a secret. It's okay for that sort of genre of game, but it's not really what I want in an Obsidian RPG. It's why I also think that there's a huge focus on combat above all else, and it's going to be at the expense of the quests and what we've maybe liked in their previous games. My biggest gripe is that I couldn't feel the weight behind my hits. Avowed's combat felt like sitting on a sofa that has a plastic cover on it. While I was given an hour with Avowed, the section I got to play had about 30 minutes of combat, allowing me to try out different classes. Since my session was short, I have little to say about the narrative one way or the other. Maybe the story is Avowed's secret sauce. Maybe the gameplay hits with more time. Maybe I just need to find the right weapon or ability. Maybe this slice just isn't Avowed's best. But for now, all I can go on is what I've played, and I left with nothing to latch onto. So again, if story is their focus, you would think that they would have put some of that in the preview. But it seems like the preview was very much about playing with different classes, your build, totally combat focused. Now, I like a lot of combat focused games, that's not a problem, but it's never been Obsidian's strength. And for them to take away from their strength to focus on combat, it seems like it could be a mixed bag. I mean, this person wasn't feeling it. The others claim to be feeling it, but then they also say the game's definitely like Skyrim, which just sounds like a load of crap, given the developers said otherwise, and it just sounds like these other people are uninformed. They haven't played many video games. That's why they think if a game has first-person fantasy combat, it's definitely like Skyrim. Kind of odd. So again, I just don't know if a lot of these previews are very honest. If you were skeptical on the game, and now you're thinking, oh, it must be good, all these people are saying it's good, I'd probably wait and see for a little bit more, maybe more footage. That's how I feel about it. I'm not totally writing it off. I just want to sort of mention that these previews seem a bit over the top. And I'll just say lastly that targeting 30 FPS comment, like no awareness at all. I said at the start, maybe the developer who made that comment, the exact quote here was, it's a first-person single-player game, you don't necessarily need that 60 frames. Like, that is just a stupid comment because a lot of people really care. A lot of the PC audience are people who used to be console players. They got sick of this because they'd occasionally play a 60 FPS game. It feels great, it feels really smooth, and then you get stuck on 30 FPS with something else, and you don't have control, at least on PC, unless the port is unbelievably bad. You should be able to get 60 frames if you've got the hardware, so a lot of people have moved over. And keep in mind that a lot of Obsidian's audience are PC players. Now, this might not apply to them, they might just be talking about console, but seeing the studio talk about, like, FPS doesn't matter at all, PC players reading that are just going to think, like, is this studio for me? Do they know what they're doing? Like, I care about FPS. Why are they telling any player, whether they're on console or not, that 60 FPS doesn't matter because it's a single-player game? Now, I'm not a huge graphics person. I don't care. I play games from all eras. I love them. I find that even if graphics are good, like, you stop caring after a little bit. It just feels normal. And it's exactly the same with an older game. You get used to the graphics really quickly. But myself and many others, we can tell the difference with FPS. It's the difference between it feeling smooth and just feeling a little robotic when you're moving around and everything. Like, the frames do matter. I feel the same about resolution. Couldn't really care less about the textures and so on for the most part. Resolution is a big thing as well, going from like 1080p to 1440p and so on. But his justification for that comment is to say you don't necessarily need 60 frames, and that allows us to get a lot juicier with VFX and lighting and all this other stuff. Again, most people, that'll wear out in about 2 seconds, and then you'll just be annoyed that you're playing at 30 FPS again. I feel like they say this, but the truth is, they just want the shinier graphics because it's better for the marketing and putting out trailers and stuff. Whereas showing 60 FPS on the screen, you can't really demonstrate that. Someone actually has to play it to sort of figure out if it feels good or not. So it sounds like just a marketing thing, and that's why some players might have to suffer. Anyway, playing on PC, this might not apply to me. I just think it was a dumb comment. It's quite interesting because Avowed, I thought it was going to be in a better place with the delay releasing in February, but now Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is releasing at the same time. So I think it's going to get overshadowed. Anyway, we'll see if the previews, are they accurate, all the positive ones? Or will the lone wolf who claimed it was ordinary, will they end up being right? I guess we'll find out in about 6 months. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.